Ready? Yeah. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon's pre-meeting, we're going to be discussing our asset forfeiture funds, and I'm going to give you a very brief description how it works and our involvement in the program. What is our purpose? HPD Policy 305, which I have here, we have a policy that strictly deals with asset forfeiture. It talks about how we're involved with it, what we do with the funds, things like that. So we have a policy here. We also have policies, the Asset Forfeiture Law and Practice Manual that is set forth by the government, and an asset forfeiture policy manual from the Department of Justice. So we've got lots of rules and regulations that we deal with when dealing with this. Our policy states the principal objective of forfeiture in law enforcement is to deter crime by providing criminals of the profits and proceeds of their illegal activities and to weaken criminal enterprises by removing the instrumentalities of the crime. In all cases, officers shall strictly comply with applicable constitutional, statutory, and administrative requirements governing seizure, practice, and procedures. Financial revenue must not be allowed to jeopardize the effective investigation and prosecution of criminal offenses, officer safety, and the integrity of ongoing investigations or the due process rights of citizens. In all cases, the Huntersville Police Department will strive to avoid any appearance of impropriety in the acquisition, use, or sale of forfeited property. The reason I put that in there is that is our top statement we have here. That is our guiding principle for this. Who do we target and how does the process work? We all have officers at the Homeland Security Investigation and the Department of, Drug Enforcement Agency Task Force. Both of these task forces target transnational criminal organizations. That means that this drugs that we're using are coming out of the country into the United States. These folks are not out here on your corners looking at street-level drug dealers. They're not in the schools. We're not targeting kids or low-level stuff. We are looking at large quantities of drugs and large amounts of money. They are strictly working on large drug cases. These sometimes bleed in other crimes, human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, things like that. We generate leads from our informants, which is generally previous arrest, physical and electronic surveillance, and all that information has to be vetted and understood with the court by the constitutional rules and regulations we set forth. And we have to abide by all that as well as state. And all that has to be done before it's able to be put into a search warrant and signed by a magistrate or before it goes to court. Once warrants have been issued, the drugs, currency, and other contraband must be directly tied to the case and shown to be proceeds from the crime. I'm not aware of anyone who's had their civil rights violated by any of the members of these task forces with which HPD is associated. I'm sure that it's happened out there in times, but in North Carolina, we are not allowed to do that. And I think that's one of the major distinctions we have is that these are federal task force. Huntersville Police Department or any state agency does not do any civil forfeitures whatsoever. It all has to be criminal, which means there has to be evidence of a crime. That's the only time that we would take any type of contraband or anything like that. Come on. All right, so I've got three definitions of our forfeiture, criminal versus civil. Criminal forfeiture is exactly what it says. When you get arrested, they would take your evidence of that crime, money, drugs, whatever happens to be, and it would be tied directly to a criminal case. At the same time, quite often now they are doing a civil forfeiture as well. That gives them an opportunity to come to court, to present their case, to show where this money came from, and then they run those simultaneously. If they don't show up in their allotted time or they forfeit that property or evidence, it would go into the administrative forfeiture, which means that it is both the civil and administrative is against the property itself, but that does not mean it's not tied to the crime. So the administrative is where the large majority of this ends up, because if you got and I'll give you an example then, if you got someone that you stopped that's got 14 kilos of cocaine and $200,000 and they're a courier, the first thing they're going to say is, it's not mine. It's not my drugs, not my money. I don't know where it came from. I'm just picking it up here and delivering from point A to point B. And so they give the opportunity right now to forfeit that. They still go through the same process. It still gets the opportunity for anyone to come forward and admit it, which is very rarely, because most of these folks that are dealing drugs are not going to come and say, yeah, that's my drugs or that's my money. And so it ends up in an administrative portion of that.
Just to make a clarification, so for the administrative, there's a claim period, and if someone submits a claim during the claim period after administrative forfeiture has been initiated, it stops completely and it has to turn over to criminal or civil. So you can't move forward in an administrative forfeiture process if a claim is made. Once a claim is made, that's when they're going to initiate criminal and usually civil at the same time. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. At any time during any of this, someone comes forward and you have an issue, or one of the prosecutors, or there's something that comes up is right, the whole process starts and it goes back from the beginning if need be, and it goes through the process. Everything is done by the rules that's set forth for us. Where do these funds come from and how can we use them? Forfeited funds are restricted and audited. Funds cannot be used to supplant funds in the local budget. That means that if we go through there and we have a budget and we're like, okay, we normally put $100,000 in travel and training for our training, so we're going to take that out, we're going to give that to Parks and Rec, and we're going to move $100,000 out of our drug fund into that. You can't do that. It has to be outside of our normal budget process that we have requests and things like that. And when it talks about being audited, every year we have to submit a sheet that shows how much money we started with, how much it came in, document all the cases, the checks that came in with it, and then how much money we spent. And at any time, it's just like IRS. You file your tax with IRS. This is very similar. You file your stuff with the Department of Treasury and the Department of the HSI. It can be used to make significant improvements to capabilities of the department. I had a question earlier today from one of our council persons that asked, can we use it for drug rehabilitation and things like that? We can use community programs up to $25,000 in a calendar year. So we can donate up to $25,000 every year for that. I'll also tell you that whenever we bring the funds in with the federal government, all the money, it has to be net proceeds. So all of the money that goes back to pay for victims rights, prosecuting, all that stuff gets taken off the top of that. Then it comes to the bottom. When it gets, all that's been taken out, the federal government gets 15 to 20% off the top, and then it's accorded down from everybody and how much should they put into the case. We receive a relatively small portion of seized assets compared to what we bring in. They're bringing in millions of dollars, and we may end up with $50,000, which is a small chunk out of a huge amount. Any asset seized must be cleared by the judge. Well, no matter which one of those it falls into, it's always reviewed by the judge, and it goes from that point. They've got different portions of it. They look at it. They look at the civil liabilities. They look at, make sure people's rights have not been violated, so on and so forth. If it is owned by the owner, it has to be no liens on it, and it has to be their property. If it's not cash, the victim, if not cash, is there a victim that's entitled to it? For example, which is, I talked to the agents today, it's very rare they do houses or anything like that anymore. But say you, a man or woman are married and the husband's selling drugs and she doesn't know that he's been doing this, and they can prove that the proceeds from his drug sales is paying for the house. So the house would be seized, but what would happen is, being an innocent owner doctrine would show that the house would be sold and that she would get her money back and then his would be forfeited. Or she would have the option to remortgage whatever happens to be and get her portion out of it. So folks that have been proven to be innocent, they are not taken advantage of. They do have that opportunity to get their money back. It's just like if you get stopped with a criminal case out here and we see the evidence from a crime, that goes in there until the determination is made. If it's a murder case, we're going to take the murder weapon, no matter if it was your neighbor's gun or what. If you're driving your neighbor's car, sometimes we would seize that car until we get it processed. But if you're not contributing to this case, you would typically get your information back if they cannot prove that it's completely tied to that drug case. And it says administrative fees taken the federal government. I read that it's 20% almost now. The remainder is distributed through mandated pay per equity formula for all cases. That would be that how much information we put into it and how much time and energy. We have a case I'm going to read at the end that was one of our task force officers did that was a good bust we had this past, well, actually on the 10th, so it's 8 days ago. Where are these drugs coming from? The drug funds coming from? The forfeitures have a direct tie to drugs and have been released to us through their federal courts. This is, we only get the drugs and information, the drugs and money after it's been through the court process. If we go out and seize $3 million now, it may be a year, 6 months, 2 years before we actually get those back. It goes through the process. All the administrative process has been done. They have opportunities for appeals and things like that. So once again, we're following the rules and regulations. How many cases? In 2022, fiscal year 2022, we brought in 20 checks, but not always are those checks are going to be, we could have one multiple checks from the same case, 36 in 2023, and we've only brought in one so far since July of this year. They're working a lot more cases than that right now. I can promise you that. I talked to them today, and they've got, this one task force officer's got 5 or 6 he's running at one time, different things. Now, they're not always connected. Sometimes they are, so it just depends on this. Eventually, all those cases are going to get consolidated, so you may be running 3 cases. You make arrest on some of those. You find out that he's supplied by a bigger person. All those cases are consolidated. That's why quite often it's hard to track these cases. How many different individuals? These cases involve month-long investigation with dozens of people. Not all suspects are arrested. Some become informants to lessen or remove charges. And then some of them are simply couriers or mules, whatever you want to call them. They're just transport back and forth. And that's one of the cases we'll talk about is we had a guy deliver $135,000 cash. The guy said, I'll give you $500, pick up this bag and take it to this place. He did. The agent this morning told me that they've arrested one guy, they have stopped one guy and taken money from him 3 different times and never arrested him, didn't seize the car, nothing that. He's a courier, they know he's a courier. He gets paid to pick up money and take it from one spot to the other. Is he guilty, a criminal? Yes, but they're not going to waste their time on that. What types of assets? Cash, automobiles, and real estate, weapons, and other types of property. Huntersville Police Department does not receive real estate, weapons, autos, unless the items are loaned to us by a federal agency. What does that mean? We don't get houses or guns or anything like that. The guns are going to be destroyed. The autos is basically what we had in the past. We've had, like the Homeland Security folks say, we're going to give you this seized car that's been through the court process for your agent to drive, to the task force agent. So he drives it for 2 years. When they get done with it, it goes back to them. So we don't get any proceeds off that. It would go back into the fund. And like I said earlier, the Huntersville Police Department in the state of North Carolina, we don't do civil forfeitures. Everything is criminal. It has to be tied to a case, has to be evidence of a crime. All right, so how do we use these funds? This last one we did, we purchased the electric vehicle for the Greenways, which we use for big meetings, big organizations, Outroot, Huntersville Christmas, Hello Huntersville, things like that. We also had an equipment vehicle that we store in all of our SWAT equipment, drones, negotiation equipment, some traffic equipment, things like that. Replaced one of our motorcycle, brought 2 new light towers for out there during some of these events, as well as if we do in DWI task force, things like that. And then we replaced our 40 caliber guns with a 9mm Glock. That was $284,000 that would pay for out of drug dealers' money that didn't get put back on the taxpayers. So I live in town, I like that. That reduces a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff we could use that $284,000 for other things. So if you want to help parks and rec and stuff like that, that money that we would have used for these items can be used in the budget for that. All right, so this last one that I was going to tell you about. This happened, the arrest was actually December 10th. So in August of this year, a task force officer with Homeland Security and the DEA, along with other law enforcement agencies, have been investigating distribution of large quantity of narcotics. This was our Huntersville task force officer's case. They had been watching this person for a while, whether they were doing physical surveillance, electronic surveillance, so on and so forth. So they knew he was moving large amounts of drugs. This person lived in Huntersville. This person moved to Charlotte shortly after they started investigation, sometime between August, September, and he was coming back to Huntersville to the Walmart and doing his dealing. So this started in Huntersville, and he was coming back and doing it. So he was bringing in guns and drugs and money into Huntersville. So they started watching this person, and they got a tip that he was delivering money to a place over here at the Mecklenburg-Gaston County line. They were sitting over there. They found out that the suspect vehicle pulled up there. They watched him get into a car, another person. They drove up the road to a semi-truck. Guy in a semi-truck gets out. They swap one bag for the other. They both take off and leave. They stop the guy that they had been watching, $135,000 cash, 18 kilos of fentanyl cocaine. So the semi-truck takes off. They go up the road. They get it stopped in Iredell County. You can go on Facebook and look at their thing about this. Another 45 kilograms of cocaine fentanyl as well. So the person they had been watching, they got a warrant for his search of his home off this information, and the information these folks turned over to us, went to his house and got between $500,000 and $700,000 in cash, as well as some other drugs. This happened last Sunday, and within about a 4-hour period, all this transaction. So, we get a lot of flack for doing this, but we're trying to do the best job we can with the rules and regulations set forth for us. Am I sorry we're doing this? Absolutely not. Every penny I spend that takes money out of drug dealers' hands, I love it. Everything we buy, whatever. I'm not ashamed of this whatsoever. I think we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, and I'll stand by it. Questions?
I have a lot, so I'll just ask one and pass the mic. But so you touched on this earlier, but just want to reiterate or get a little more information, more detail. What happens when an innocent's property is used for illegal activity without their knowledge? So like that process, how long? You said that the wife in your example would get half of the house. Is she out of luck, and what that process, like how long is that process? How long is that window, and when?
So I will say that with real estate, it's a little bit different because typically they don't seize real estate prior to and hold on to it. There are certain circumstances, exigent circumstances where they might do that, but typically real estate is one of the types of property that would not be actually seized and in custody of the agency until after the process has been followed. So I just wanted to go ahead and make that distinction. And then as far as the innocent owner doctrine, even if they are an innocent owner, let's say the example that we talked about earlier, the gun, it still might be seized as evidence for the criminal prosecution. So at that point in time, it's going to be held on to during the investigation. But later, as far as the forfeiture process, they might be able to put forth the innocent owner doctrine. Now, there are certain requirements that have to be satisfied. They can't know that the conduct giving rise to the forfeiture is occurring, or if they do learn of it, they have to take certain steps to try to stop it, to try to alert, for example, law enforcement agencies, or they have to stop the person from using it in some way, revoke their permission to use it, for example. So they do have to actually successfully put forth that effort and succeed in the forfeiture proceeding on that doctrine. I didn't mean to step on your toes, but I just wanted to make the distinction between the real estate and then, for example, something that is actually being seized as evidence for the investigation of the crime.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if it's a main home, there also, the government gives them a legal representation for that.
Yes, for the primary residence, that is, they can have appointed counsel.
Correct. Good question, though, but that process is really not out of our hands. If it's part of a crime, then it's whatever time to get through the court process.
Chief, I have a clarifying question and then just one other question too. But so just to be clear, the Huntersville Police Department does not seize any assets or contraband. It's the task forces that will come in and do that, correct?
That is correct. These agents, these task force agents are Huntsville police officers. They're sworn in through special deputized through these federal government, and then all the process is federal. This is going to be agents. They actually do this season. Federal court, federal prosecutors, and they seize that. The Huntsville Police Department is against the law in North Carolina to do civil forfeiture or civil seizure in North Carolina by us. It has to go through the court process if you're going to take folks' property other than the cash that's used at the time of the arrest.
Okay, thank you. And then just one other question. Has anyone appealed an asset forfeiture case that we benefited from and we found out that there was a miscarriage of justice that had taken place?
No, everything that we've been given, we've never had anybody come back and say, that was wrong, we have to give the money back. That's part of our agreement if that does happen. But from talking to those folks, it is a lengthy process, and they've got opportunity to appeal and whatever happens to be. So we've never worried about that, and it's never happened.
And first, can you pass on thanks to the officers involved in the case that you were speaking about, you know, from someone who has family who has been directly impacted by the opioid epidemic, you know, some good news there to
Absolutely, yes,
get some fentanyl off the streets. So I just have a few questions. And one is also, you touched on this, and I kind of just wanted a really clarifying statement of that. We have not received asset forfeitures from civil cases. They've all been criminal cases, or can you just kind of clarify that a little bit?
Sure. We have received proceeds from civil cases. Like we said at the beginning, of that generally they run together, a criminal case as well as a civil case. Generally, when you have property, you're going against property, it has to be a civil process. It's just like when you sue your neighbor about something that falls on your property or damage your house. It's not a criminal case, it's a civil case. So there's quite often where they're money laundering, where they're putting it through different places, that they would have to go after those proceeds. So if they show that this person's selling drugs, bringing in the money, and then they're giving it to money to other businesses and stuff like that, that is when your civil process comes through. So yes, we do receive funds from the civil side, but it all originates in a criminal case.
Okay, that helps, thank you.
Only federal civil.
Yes, always federal civil case. Thank you.
And then you had mentioned there's an audit once a year?
That was the sheet I was talking about, that we have to show how much we had, how much was brought in, all of our individual things that we've done, how much we've used, and then we file it just like we do, like with your taxes, and then they review it. They don't actually come in and do it. Once the money's been given to us and been through the process, it is ours. They don't come and check and see how much we've got every so often. But everything that we bought with it, it has to be within the rules set forth by them, excuse me.
Is it possible to send the board a copy of that?
This is a federal document, and if I can get it for you, I absolutely will. I'll let the lawyer look at it. Which one?
So he did send out the link to one of the manuals, actually to a couple. So there's the Guide to Equitable Sharing for State, Local, and Tribal. That's a condensed version. It's about 30 pages. The other one's about 190 pages, which is much more robust. But I believe he did send you that link. If you didn't receive it, we can resend that to you.
And then the legal side's 527 pages if you've got a week that you have nothing else to read.
So is that more of like the template, or is that the actual?
This is the actual policies and procedures for that. I have one that we do from the state we do from the federal government that we submit to them. They're picky when it comes to their forms. It says on the bottom of it, it has to go through their side to get access to anything. So if I can talk to the agent, he's like, yeah, sure, it's no big deal. It's last year's, you're good to go. Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, because I was more interested in, like, I saw those, but in seeing, like what you submit. Okay. And then I just have one more question, and that's, I am curious if Huntersville chose not to participate in asset forfeiture, what would happen to that money allocation that would have come to Huntersville? Where would it go?
Still, we keep it. It's ours. Now, if not, then there's other process to do something like that, but that money's been given to us. It's ours to use for law enforcement projects.
Okay. Thank you.
Do informants also lose their property, or is that part of the deal of becoming an informant?
You're talking about like if you have an informant that gets arrested, gets stopped and said, hey, we'd like to know where this came from, and they use in their car, it's possible they could use their stuff as well, even if they become an informant.
Okay.
They still, what would it be is they committed a criminal act, they're just not charging them with it in return for their information.
Okay. And then when you say drugs, you've mentioned some pretty hard drugs. Do we ever do anything like this when it comes to marijuana?
Do we seize marijuana?
Property?
We absolutely could. We're not, from talking to these folks this morning, it's fentanyl, heroin, cocaine that they're looking at. If you get a tractor trailer load of marijuana coming in, absolutely.
Okay.
But you're talking about pounds? No.
Okay.
That's not what these guys are after, guys and girls are after.
Okay. And I think just one more, but no guarantees. I'm confused about the timing on the slide with the year 2024. You said that was in July? Oh, fiscal, okay, yep, thank you. I'll close with that, thank you.
Absolutely. You may go over what it's used for.
Actually, one more, sorry. What percentage of the cases are administrative? You mentioned that's the largest amount, but what percentage?
What happens is that if you got a criminal case and no one shows up for the civil case, and no one accepts responsibility for that. It's turned over to a judge, because what's happened is we've taken this in, it has to go in front of a judicial official to be able to release for that. So like 80% of this stuff, people say, not my money, not my drugs, not my guns, not my car, whatever it happens to be. So it just stagnates there unless it goes to administrative court. It goes in front of the judge, they say, we've given them this amount of time to do it, no response, Your Honor. We did this, Your Honor, we contacted these folks, Your Honor, no response, no one's claimed it, it's turned over. Good? Thank you so much for your time, I appreciate this.